Welcome to Nitty Gritty Real Estate. In this series, we're interviewing Matthew Cox. He's a con man who committed tens of millions in bank fraud and served 12 years in prison as a result. We don't condone his criminal behavior, but we're tapping into his unique real estate knowledge so that we can become better real estate investors. In this video, we learn Matt's origin story, how he went from being a mortgage broker to becoming the FBI's most wanted man. Let's get into it. Hi, I'm Ben Clardy. I'm a real estate investor and coach, and today I have with me Matt Cox. Matt Cox is famous and notorious.
Infamous.
Infamous, for basically committing, the number's kind of up in the air, but 12 million-ish in bank fraud. I know that I've heard a lot of different numbers, but
it's like between 15 to 55 million, depending on who you depending on who you believe. And how much of that is attributed directly to me. So, which I don't think 55 million is directly attributed to me. It's more like the brokerage business and the brokers that I owned a brokerage business, and the brokers that worked underneath me is the number that the FBI was going with when they were trying to hit me for money laundering at one point.
To max out that number.
Yeah, to max out. They're saying that I'm responsible for everybody underneath me. And then they could balloon up the number to 55 million. So, but on average, basically, I pled guilty for roughly $15 million in personally that I committed in fraud. That's the basic number. I don't know where 12 came from. 12, you know where 12 came from? 12 came from when I was in Tampa. The number was 12 because the real estate scam that I pulled off in Tampa was a $12 million scam. That's what it was, 11.5 million.
A single scam.
Yeah, just that one. Right, which I feel bad about. So anyway, about me is
let's hear the Matt Cox story. Like, just I guess where were you at before you got into fraud, and how'd you transition into that? Because you were in the brokerage business, and then you saw an opportunity, right?
Right. I owned a brokerage business, and actually sat for my real estate license also, although I didn't take the state test because I was indicted, which was going to dampen the whole process. So what ended up happening was I owned a brokerage business for about 5-6 years. I had about 12, 13 mortgage brokers that worked underneath me. At the same time, I was buying houses and flipping houses, and ultimately I ended up getting charged with wire fraud. I believe it's wire fraud, where I'd actually got caught for lying on an application. And then, so during that process, I was also flipping houses and renovating houses and building and doing new construction. So I ended up going from the brokerage business, and while I was on federal probation, I started buying and selling properties more, and I started flipping properties. And I mean, I've been involved in everything from obviously directly borrowing money from the banks on investment properties. I think I had 54 rental units at one point. I know I've flipped about 100 between 100 to 150 houses. What else? I've owned, I've new construction, owned 2 development companies, had multiple, I'm not sure what you would call, like a rooming house, or I think we had a name for them, Eco Suites. So I had a bunch of those. I'm not counting each room as a rental house. Each house would have been, like, if it had 11 rooms in it or 8 rooms, then to me that was one rental. That was rental unit. Right, rental unit. Yeah, that's one. That's a rental unit. That one over there is a rooming house that happens to have 8 units inside of it. So I'm not sure what you would, if you calculated each one of those as its own individual unit. I'm not sure what the number would be as far as how many rental properties I had. So I would a lot of times I would convince. I've done owner financing. I've convinced owners to owner finance properties. I've done what's called wraparound mortgages, which I notice a lot of people don't talk about. I've obviously convinced owners to owner finance their properties. I've done properties where you buy it subject to the mortgage.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of subject to mortgages. I've done properties where the owners hold back second mortgages. So I've done multiple. I've done deed in lieu of foreclosures. So I've done just a ton of different types of loans, or I'm sorry, of purchases, where of course obtaining the actual money to purchase the property is really the hardest part, in my opinion. Finding a property, that's great. Can you buy the property? And can you buy the property correctly? If you buy the property and you pay too high of an interest rate with the terms, it's a bad term, then how can you really make a profit on that property? So you have to buy the property correctly, right? You have to know what you're doing with the property when you're going in. So I've had all those scenarios.
So all this different experience you've had in real estate, is a lot of this before you got into the brokerage side of it, or is this kind of?
No, it was actually while I owned the brokerage business.
Oh, okay.
And I was partners in a real estate company, but I wasn't actually the real estate broker. I don't know if I messed that up.
No, you get it.
I don't know. I wasn't the actual real estate broker, so I actually was partners in a real estate company. So and obviously we've done property management goes along with that. If you have 50 or 60 rental units, you're obviously if you're managing them, then we were managing them. I had a property management company, so those are all experiences that I had. Ultimately, of course, where my story goes off the tracks is that obviously I got in trouble with the federal government. I was on probation. I was in a bad spot, and I started committing a much larger mortgage fraud. And that led me to creating false identities, and basically the false identities that I had created, which were called synthetic identities or phantom borrowers. I would create false identities, and then I would buy properties in the name of those identities, and I would record the value of those properties at a much, much higher value than the properties were worth. I'm buying properties for $50,000. I'm recording the sale of those properties at $200,000.
So to drive the value of the neighborhood
Absolutely,
up?
Drive the value of the neighborhood up.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm doing that is that I want these synthetic identities to own 5 houses that are worth $1 million. And of course, if you have multiple of them, multiple identities buying 4 or 5 houses apiece in the same neighborhood, the values of that neighborhood shoot up through the roof. That allowed me to turn around and go to the banks and say, hey, look, I own $1 million worth of properties. I need you to lend me 80 or 150,000 on this property, 190 on this property, 160 on this property. So they would lend me $800,000, $900,000 on these properties. I would then pull that money out, make a few payments, let them go into foreclosure, and then of course the banks would foreclose on the properties, and the bank would think to themselves, well, this property is worth $200,000, and we lent the guy 190, and he made a few payments, and then he went into foreclosure, and that happens. So they'd foreclose on the property, they'd put it back on the market, and they'd try and sell it. It wouldn't sell. It'd take 6 months to a year to sell, and they'd eventually sell the property for $60,000, and they'd lose $130,000 or $110,000, $120,000, and they just accepted that as being okay because that does happen. Everything because I knew how the mortgage system worked, I was able to manipulate it so that even when they got taken for $100,000 or $200,000 or 3 or 4 banks, a total of $1 million, they didn't realize they had been taken. They just assumed they made a bad underwriting decision, and they lost the money, and that was it. So there was I did that for about 2 years. It was about $11.5 million I borrowed, and these investors made, these phantom borrowers or synthetic identities made. And at some point, the FBI got involved. Someone ended up getting caught and cooperated, and there was a task force put together, and they came after me, and then I went on the run so I took off. I found out, I had a friend that was a sheriff's deputy, and he tipped me off that I was going to be arrested. So I took off on the run for 3 years, and I think I borrowed another $3.5 million while I was on the run. So And of course, while I was on the run, I had fake passports and fake, well, they weren't fake. They were real passports. They were just weren't in my name. So I was getting driver's licenses and passports issued in other people's names, and I was traveling the country and continue to commit fraud. And 3 years later, the Secret Service caught me. I was #1 on the Secret Service's most wanted list. The FBI was looking for me, the U.S. Marshals. I ended up getting caught at some point. I actually have been caught several times. I've been caught by banks. I've been caught in banks. I've been brought downtown to the police station, talked my way out of it, convinced them that they had the wrong person, got let go. Eventually, though, I was caught. Secret Service caught me in Nashville. I was arrested, and I was pled guilty because I'm extremely guilty. There's no going to trial. Mm-hmm. So I pled guilty. I was sentenced to 26 years. I went to 26. Yeah, it was a bad day. It was a bad day. Cried like a baby, like a child for hours. It was horrible. So went to prison, ended up getting my sentence reduced twice. So I ended up serving 12 and a half years. However,
if I could, based on what? Why was the sentence reduced? Just is it as simple as good behavior or something?
Oh, no,
but what
was it wasn't
that?
reduced. No. The reduction in my sentence was specific because while I was incarcerated, the government asked me to cooperate with them specifically, they wanted me to, one, be interviewed. I was interviewed by Dateline NBC News. There's a program called Dateline. I don't know if it's not really big anymore. I don't even know if it's still on.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I know what you're talking about, though.
Anyway, you could do a whole Dateline thing. So I was interviewed by Dateline, and so I was interviewed by Dateline, and they asked me to be interviewed, and I was interviewed by another show called American Greed. I'm not sure if American Greed's on anymore either. That was that MSNBC or NBC? I'm not sure. Anyway, so I was interviewed by them. I was asked to write what's called an ethics and fraud course, which was used to teach mortgage brokers. If you're a mortgage broker, you have to do I think it's 6 or 7 hours every year of continuing education. 3 hours of that is on ethics and fraud. I taught that course, and so it was used. So at that point, my sentence, we petitioned the court. My sentence, it was a whole process, but the court reduced my sentence by 7 years. So then, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, these interviews, it's basically they're reducing your sentence because you're giving them value to basically help prevent fraud, right?
Right, to help prevent fraud.
That's the whole thing, right?
Right, absolutely.
Okay.
It's the whole Frank Abagnale, catch me if you can thing.
Right.
So that was 7 years off my sentence, and then I ended up cooperating in a specific case that had to do with wire fraud, mm-hmm. And so I cooperated in that case, and I then petitioned the court again, and they reduced my sentence by 5 additional years. At that point, I walked out of prison.
You're done.
I'm done. But while I was incarcerated for 10 years of the 12 years, I taught. Actually, it was almost 11 years. It was over 10 years. I taught what's called an ACE course, which is an adult continuing education course, mm-hmm. which was real estate. So I taught the real estate course while I was in federal prison for 10 years.
In what way? Real estate?
Everything from, I just broke it down from I started at,
101.
101, what is public records? What is real property?
Yeah, okay.
How can you buy a piece of property? Why can you buy a property? Why can you borrow on that property? Why do the banks lend you money on that property? What kind of property should you look for? And I just went piece by piece, how to invest in property, all the way up for guys that are essentially getting out of prison, who have been locked up for 5 or 10 or 20 years, have no credit, they have no job history, they have no rental history, residential history, they have nothing. They have no down payment. Mm-hmm. So if I was getting out and I had nothing, what would I do and how would I invest in real estate? Mm-hmm. And that's how the class was taught me. You're teaching drug dealers and mobsters, and you're teaching guys that have robbed banks, and you're teaching these are the guys that I'm teaching how to do how to invest in real estate.
Yeah, but that's going to be some interesting knowledge to get into in another segment, because that's
Right.
good stuff to know.
Yeah, so that is, and then ultimately that's how I did a couple of some videos on the internet. They got like 1.5 million hits. I've been contacted by a bunch of people. I was contacted by you guys. You guys said, hey, it'd be great to do kind of a video on how to not get screwed in real estate, and
how better to learn not to get conned from a con man himself. That's kind of the angle.
And that's it. And and now we're here. That's how I ended up here.
Yeah. Let me circle back real quick. If I could, I want to ask, like, what was your motivation when you were, things are going good in the brokerage business, in the mortgage brokerage business? Like, was it just purely like you see an opportunity, you want to take it, or was there something like driving you? Were you, I don't know, what was the motivation that like pushed you over that line the first time to start, the whole fraud ball rolling forward?
I didn't want to do the things that were required to do it the right way. It was too time consuming. I wanted to buy certain properties. I didn't want to struggle. And I wanted to make a bunch of money as quickly as possible.
So is it greed?
Yeah, well, it would definitely be. There's definitely an aspect of greed, and yeah, definitely I would say greed and just laziness. I just didn't want to work as hard as you have to work in real estate, and that's something that you don't see on all these programs, that you buy a house, fix it up, and sell it, and this and that. It's actual work. It all sounds good. Oh, I saw this property and I bought, there used to be a video when I was out there where the guy was talking about how he bought a property for $1. And it was like, what are you doing? I mean, listen, I've had properties that I've bought where I've had hard money guys come to me and say, look, I'll do 100% financing. Just take these 2 properties off my hands. They called me, I got 2 properties, I'll do 100% financing. You don't have to make a mortgage payment for a month, just take the properties. I got those properties for not for $1, but for nothing. I actually showed up because of how taxes are paid. I actually walked away with a check for taxes, because in Florida they're paid in arrears.
Yeah.
So I actually got a check, walked away from closing with a check, and renovated those properties, sold one right away, put it on the market, sold it within 2 weeks of owning the property, and made I think I made like $7,000 immediately. Renovated the other property, borrowed money on it, renovated it, sold it to some lawyer, made like $150,000. I mean, that's a great story. But for every one of those stories, there's 30. Yeah, there's 30 horrible stories.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is, it's a hell of a lot of work. You're a glorified construction worker. And that's what it is. And it's just a ton of work and a ton of worry. And I didn't want to, at that time, I wanted it as quickly as possible, and I happened to be in a position where I could make those decisions to make that happen. And I didn't think it would catch up with me, and then it eventually did. And instead of sitting there and taking the charge and just doing my probation, I stepped it up a notch. I said, nah, I'm not going to claim bankruptcy and do all these things, and I'm not going to go get a regular job. I'm going to do this. And that was a mistake. I just escalated that fraud. I became emboldened and I escalated it. Next thing you know, I'm on the run. I've got a huge sentence, and just a series of bad decisions.
Subscribe to Nitty Gritty Real Estate for more interview videos of Matthew Cox. Together we'll learn how to become better real estate investors by learning from those who have unique perspectives in the industry. Thanks for watching.